Good afternoon, everyone. The ICF Training and Technical Assistance Team is honored to welcome you to this California Housing and Community Development Training Session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant, Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. I am LaQuantia Goodman from ICF, and I will be hosting today's session. Today's training session is part of our racial equity series and is entitled Institutional Transformation, Becoming an Anti-Racist Organization. It is my privilege to introduce today's first presenter, Kavita Singh Gilchrist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, LaQuanta. So nice to see everybody today. My name is Kavita Singh Gilchrist, and I am a co-founder of Racial Equity Partners, or REP for short. And we are so excited to bring you this training session today around institutional transformation, all of this work to bring racial equity into the work that we're doing and to create more equitable outcomes for the good folks that we serve and work with and partner with. That's what this session today is all about. I am zooming in from New York City. I live in Harlem, and we have been working virtually for over 2 years now, Racial Equity Partners. We've got a team of about 10 consultants working all across the country, largely in the housing and homelessness space, but probably about 30% of our clients do other work. So we've been really excited to learn from other organizations and what they do. And a lot of the institutional practices can be shared across sectors. So we're excited to bring this work to you today. I'm going to pass it to my colleague so that she can introduce herself. Rashima.
Thank you, Kavita. Welcome, everybody. Happy Thursday. My name is Rashima Melson. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as Black. I'm an associate with REP and then also CEO and founder of Pain Into Purpose. And we're just so excited to have you all here with us today. I'm reading the chat and seeing who's with us today. So super excited about our audience. And can you move us to the next slide so we can talk about our session outline for today?
Great.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashima.
So
go ahead, honey. Go.
Oh, okay. So as Kavita mentioned earlier, we'll be discussing the components of how to transform your workplace to an anti-racist organization, which is super imperative when working with the vulnerable population, like individuals and families experiencing homelessness. The first key components, as you can see listed here, are diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these three components are rarely ever mentioned without each other, if you've ever noticed that. And that is because you cannot fully integrate and implement one of them without all of them, right? So it's a holistic process. And then we're going to walk you through why they are essential, the differences between them, and how to ensure you are implementing them correctly within your organization. The next component is barriers to inclusion. We included this component and feel a need to address it here because we cannot fully transform to an anti-racist state just knowing how to be inclusive, but we also need to know the barriers that can prevent us from achieving inclusion. And then our last component is working against bias. So bias can sometimes occur implicitly and explicitly, which we'll touch on a little bit later. However, when this happens to take place, we need to know how to work through it and not let it deter our efforts and affect our effort and our progress towards transformation. And with that, I'll pass it to Kavita to talk about the 3 levels of racism.
Thanks, Rashima. Many of you hopefully were able to attend our session last week. It is a session that Racial Equity Partners has been doing for a number of years and each time continues to improve on, which is really looking at structural racism and the history of race in this country. So last week's session focused on systemic racism. And as we go through this trajectory of trainings, this one is focused on institutional. So it's a combination really of some of the really personal work that we have to do. The barriers that we have to confront are a bit of personal work, as well as some kind of systemic work, which is right in the middle, that institutional work. There are folks out there who talk about which is most important. Is it the personal work? Is it the systemic work? I'd say arguably right now, it is the institutional, because we are trying to change our organizations, right? And we need, obviously you need to do a little bit of everything. And for you all in your workplace, ultimately how you continue to bring these practices into the fold of your institution is really where the rubber hits the road. So today we focus here. And then on our next slide, this is, and I think you have to do another click to get the quote up. So this is how we really like to enter this work around institutional. People are looking for a tool, a practice, a guideline, and a lot of these things, we have some of all of these things, and ultimately the work is the active effort of being anti-racist. It's an active effort to continue to move forward, progress, and change. You need to work against racism with real practices and real intention. And this is a quote by the great Angela Davis, who I'm sure many of you out there in California know well. She coined this quote a long time ago when she started her own work. In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And that's really what today's intention is. What are the active efforts we're going to bring to bear in order to really make progress and advance racial equity? And then the final thing we leave you with, and we enter our sessions always with these guidelines for discussion, conversations about race and racism, and everything related to it are challenging, difficult, emotional in so many ways, and you never know what someone's experiencing. So these are some guidelines to be as respectful as we can be, and yet as honest as we can be. So the first four of these, they come to us from a gentleman named Glenn Singleton, who started doing anti-racist work in the education space in the early 90s. And he and his colleagues came up with the first four, which is one, expect to experience discomfort. As I just said, conversations about race and racism are very personal. People can feel that they're doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. If we, it's uncomfortable. It creates discomfort for all kinds of different reasons, depending on your lens and your own experience. So expect it. And if you feel it and you can kind of work through to the other end, you know that you're building that muscle that's so important when you're working on becoming more anti-racist. Stay engaged. This one's much easier said than done. As you're experiencing that discomfort, it can feel really, it can be very easy to walk away. It can be very easy to shut down. Now, there may be reasons you're shutting down. There may be reasons you want to walk away that are maybe so personal and emotional that you cannot stay in the conversation. In those instances, you take your break, right? Turn your camera off, turn your mic, whatever you have to do. Of course, you need to attend to yourself first and foremost. And yet, if you can work through it and stay engaged, or come back to the table when you can, come back and enter the conversation when you can, do your best to stay engaged and take care of yourself. The third is to speak your truth. Often when we're having conversations, we may not have the representatives of all the different groups we're talking about in the room. And so you may hear something and often we want to speak for someone else, whatever that lens might be. And we ask you to not do that. We ask you not to make excuses or speak for any other group. You are here to share your individual experience. We share things that are trends, that may be things that, people of color or South Asians or whatever reference we do to ethnicity and race. And they are things that tend to be shared, but they are not shared completely by every person, right? So remember to speak your own truth, your own experience, and that's the only way we can learn that even though there are shared experiences, we are all individuals at the end of the day. Expect and accept non-closure. This is the toughest one, right? Because we want to learn, we want to do, we want to get it going, change our practice. We want to we want to feel better at the end of a conversation, at the end of a day. We learn something. But this is a complicated topic, and the related topics are complicated. And you may hear something that you don't agree with. You may hear something that you don't understand, and we won't be able to necessarily get to the other end of that. Thankfully, we live in an internet age, and there is a lot of more information out there. And you can always grab another colleague tomorrow and go unpack a conversation where you may have felt some conflict. Really encourage you to do that. Take some notes. You know, when you start to feel those feelings and you're not sure what to do with it, take note of it so that you can bring it up with someone who you might feel closer to on another day. But everything's not going to get wrapped up in a bow. And then the last one, which doesn't come from Glenn Singleton, it just comes from all experts who have conversations around anything that causes conflict: suspend judgment. It's difficult, you know, the greatest thing we can offer you is to remember to keep your ears open, keep your heart open, and try to listen to what someone is saying, especially when it feels like the wrong thing. We need to listen more, and maybe we can't always respond at the time, but again, we can always come back to a conversation at a later time. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Rashima to take us into our next section.
I forgot I was on mute. Thanks, Kavita. So now we're going to dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion and talk a little bit about how it plays a significant role in our transformation. So we can start with diversity. Next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. So diversity is the wide variety of shared and different characteristics among human beings, right? So that's ethnicity, race, gender, age, disability, education, sexual orientation, and much more. However, in order to transform to an anti-racist organization, we must first ensure that we are a diverse organization without tokenism, right? So our goal is not to focus on having a person from each race, right? Whether Black, white, Asian, Indigenous, Native Hawaiian, Latino, Latinx, Latina, and other communities of colors on the team just to say we did it and to seem diverse, right? Our goal is to ensure that every race is represented on our team and that their collective thoughts, ideas, and contributions are present and integrated. Also, it is critical to remember that everyone has intersectional identities, right? So looking at an example, if we were in the process of engaging with 3 different Black individuals who wanted to apply for a job with your organization, right? But they represent 3 completely different cultural aspects for African Americans, whether you identify as Black and or Africans, right? So one of the individuals could grow up in a family who's super wealthy with white foster parents. The second individual could have grown up in an impoverished neighborhood with one parent who is in government assistance, such as SNAPs, Section 8, or any other government assistance benefits that potentially they were using at the time, right? And then the last individual could have grown up in a wealthy Black family with both parents, right? You're gonna get 3 different cultural aspects and different experiences from all 3 of those individuals, but they share the same race and the same characteristics in a sense, but different, right? And so that means that they have different qualities and perspectives and ideas that they can contribute to your organization and the clients you serve, even having a better interaction and resonation with the clients to be able to potentially build that gap, that trust gap that's between the client and the org, right? And so thinking about that right there is the ultimate goal of diversity. We want to ensure that all races of all identities, cultures, and characteristics are represented and heard, and not just the dominant race of white individuals being present. Furthermore, it is the much more part of the diversity definition that we tend to glaze over and focus only on the tangibles like race, gender, age, disability, education, or sexual orientation, when it is the in-between essence that links the characteristics to the individual's experiences, that adds the true diversity and representation that is needed. So with that, we're going to take a deeper dive into the role of intersectionality. Next slide, please. Awesome. So intersectionality is the conjunction that links the characteristics together that make up an individual. So we have this quote here that says, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issued lives, right? So it's not just having one person of each race and binary genders will not automatically result in one's organization being counted as diverse. We must think about and incorporate their experiences and the issues that they go through, the different identities that they possess, which makes it an intersectional identities that they hold. And however, diversity alone will not transform your organization to an anti-racist organization, right? We also must include equity. Next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. Equity is about assessing the unique needs of different groups of people to provide them with access to opportunities in order for them to equally thrive economically, politically, socially, and culturally, right? So let's do a deeper dive into this. Equity is essentially, I think people, interchangeably use equity and equality, but equity is assessing where everyone is and being able to provide the people who are not where the average person is, and being able to put in that support to lift them up to where that is, and that's providing equity, right? And I love that word, not confusing equity and equality, but in order for them to equally thrive economically, politically, socially, and culturally, right? So when we're thinking about an example for people experiencing homelessness, and we think about the homeless services that you all could potentially provide, we think about what's an example of equity, right? We think about the assessment phase, and then we think about prioritization. And we look at which populations aren't necessarily being equitably serviced. In the sense that when we look at the data, it shows that, this is an example, it shows that families of colors or individuals of colors who are experiencing homelessness are less served, or their numbers are higher than their white counterpart. And we have to see why. Are they receiving vouchers quicker? Are they being pushed through the system quicker? Are they being helped in a different way than people of color are? And so we have to look at that and be able to balance that out. And essentially what equity is balancing out the line and the spectrum of who's receiving services and who's not. And then with that, it's just super critical, because if we don't have equity, we're going to continue to perpetuate, honestly, a racist organization, right? In the sense of we're not caring for all of our communities, but uplifting only one. And so it's super, super important that we implement equity in the process, and centering that around race, because when we look at that, racial equity is the center of where we should be centering our efforts. And then the rest of that falls into that with our intersectional identities that individuals may possess. So let's jump into the next slide to discuss a little deeper the difference between equity and equality. Awesome, thank you. So as stated earlier, equality is giving everybody the exact same thing. So technically, currently, we could say that everything is equal. Everybody's receiving the same thing. And then just thinking about what I just stated about equity, but everybody is at different places. So a nice, quick, brief example to help kind of picture this is if we were all, or housing, right? For instance, individuals experiencing homelessness who are in the process of needing support for obtaining housing. So if we look at housing vouchers and the requirements to get those, we'll say, well, some people are starting at different places. Some individuals are starting directly from experiencing poverty. And from poverty, they fell into experiencing homelessness. And so they have no support. With families of colors, there are usually no generational wealth that's built. And so they're starting from ground zero. When we look at other clients, potentially clients not of color, we see that they may have had something of that phase going on in life, just going through a rough time, but they have more resources available for them. So they're starting at a different level. And what we want to do is be able to provide everybody with the same amount of balancing, in the sense of balancing it out, that they can reach the same average level as everybody else. So if we give everybody housing, right? Say for instance, this is equality. We give every single person in need a house, apartment, a place to reside, right? There's still going to be some inequity in that, because within owning a house or within owning your own residence, you still need house management. right? You still need to learn financial literacy in order to, how do you actually pay a bill? How do you actually do certain things if for so long you've been only known to use government assistance and certain things were handled for you? And outside of that, you have no idea, right? And then we compare that to others who were just having a hard time and say, well, I have all these skills already. So all I needed was the house. I'm good to go. I'm back on my feet. But then when we look back at our families or individuals of color, we see that there's still a need there. We think when we look at the data, why, when we say people have transitioned into permanent housing and we call it successful, why are we seeing people return month after month, or why are we seeing the numbers not divvy down? And that's because it's not an equitable process. We need to ensure that we're providing supportive services, all wraparound services that's needed. And we have to really look into that, because we say housing first, but we know that housing first, not housing only. So we want to make sure that we're providing everybody what they need to be able to create a sustainable lifestyle for themselves, right? And so what we want to do is move to another example, because for this example, you see we have the boxes, right? And so it's showing what I just discussed, in that everybody is at different places. And as long as you see the trees there, but just because the tree is present doesn't mean everybody has the opportunity or supports needed to reach that apple. So we have the boxes, but then we want to look at a different example. So if we can go to the next slide. Awesome, thank you. So on this slide, we see that it's a different type of situation for where equity needs to be provided. And we see in the picture to our left, there's a fence up, right? And so obviously, if you're a little shorter, you can't see over the fence. And so in order to make sure that everyone could still see the fence, where we're balancing out the odds, right? We moved boxes, right? We even added a ramp, you see in that picture, so that everyone can be able to see over the fence. Okay, and then so our next slide and our ultimate goal, what we want to show, if you can move us to the next slide. For this slide, right, our goal is liberation. So if you see on the top slides, you see that there is a fence, and we did the same thing that we did in the second slide, where we added the boxes to balance out the odds to provide equity, right? But we want to make sure that we're moving from not just equality, incorporating equity, and then potentially all the way up to liberation, where there is no fence, there are no barriers in the way for our clients. And that is the ultimate goal of what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're explaining what it means for it to look like for your organization to fully implement equity, and not just frontline services, but within your policy, your practices, your interactions between you, your employees, your coworkers, and the populations that you serve. And so now that we've discussed diversity and equity, it's now time for us to move into our last trifecta element, which is inclusion. Next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. So inclusion is ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to be involved in building the table, and not just being the
Is Rashima frozen for everybody? Okay. Okay. Rashima, can you just pick that up from the beginning again? You froze.
Awesome. Apologies for that. Yeah. So thinking about the quote that Kavita mentioned earlier about Angela Davis, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. This implies that it is not enough to be neutral, right? We must pick a side. So neutral insinuates that one is okay with watching racist actions take place, but feel it is okay as long as they are not personally responsible. However, that's not true at all. For example, imagine a child is being kidnapped in front of you. Is your natural instinct going to tell you it's okay because I'm not the one kidnapping them, I can go about my day? Your natural instinct is to help, to be involved, right? And so what we're trying to say is, if you sit back and do nothing, you're perpetuating the issue instead of helping to absolve the issue. And so that's why it's super important to not just be diverse with individuals that make up your organization and implement equity, but also ensure that everyone has access and opportunity to be involved, and not just the invisible backbone to the community. And now with that, we'll move to our next section.
Awesome. So good. Thank you, Rashima. So we are gonna do small group breakouts. So I'm just gonna set this up for 1 minute and then we're gonna open the rooms. Rashima just did an awesome run on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to put you in small breakout rooms, maybe 6, 7 people per room. Ask you if you can at all, please turn your cameras on. It's always better to have a conversation with someone if you can see them. So if you can, and of course, if you can't, respectfully, we understand. You may be sharing personal experiences. Remember that they're personal, they stay in the group of which who you're going to talk to. And the question is, since we're talking about inclusion, which is really the full goal, right? You can work on diversity as much as you want. Ultimately, if people don't feel included and at the table at work, it doesn't matter how diverse you are. So the question we have for you is, when was the first time, once you get a little personal, when was the first time you, or a time, when you felt that you didn't belong or that you were excluded? Why do you think this happened? So that's the question that we're asking you to share. It'd be great if you can get around the full breakout room. If you can't, try and get as far as you can, take a couple of minutes and then pass the baton, okay? I'll open the breakout rooms now and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. They're open. Thank you, Erin, for putting it in the chat.
Kavita, can you remind me how long we're breaking for?
15 minutes.
Okay, I'll pull it back up in just a few minutes then.
And Kavita, are you?
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Would love to see, thank you for those who are still on camera and others, if you could join us. We're gonna have just a 10-minute debrief and see how it went. If folks are willing to share, how was that experience? The good, the bad, the ugly, you know, what did you either experience, maybe something that you heard? How did it feel to share being excluded, or what examples came, or was there silence? There's something in there too. Maybe people didn't feel comfortable. Feel free to just unmute yourselves and join us.
Hi, this is Samantha. I think something that came up as maybe a little bit of a trend in our group, or you know, we didn't get to everyone, but the notion that the ability to other someone often happens for the first time in a person's life, maybe within the family context. And because we live in a society where anti-Blackness and the constructs of race and white dominance is so prevalent, that it becomes internalized within many people, and they bring that into their homes, and then they expose people to it for the first time within the family construct, before people may even encounter it in larger society sometimes.
Thank you, Samantha. We do a session on one particular aspect of that, colorism, which is something that is really shared across a number of different people of color communities, skin color very specifically, and how that has been experienced by so many people from a very young age. within their own family. Was that experience shared? Is that what within your group?
Um,
That it was
yeah,
a,
I mean, we
a
talked
family
about,
experience?
we did talk about something that is kind of related to colorism and, yeah. Mhm.
Thank you.
So I was in the same group with Samantha, and the rejection of family that my team shared with us, what resonated with me was the pain that they still carry. That's what really resonated with me. We all had, those who had an opportunity to share had different reasons and different dynamics of being separated or rejected, right? But I still could see the pain and the hurt. So we talked about forgiveness and healing, self-healing for ourselves, you know, and for me, self-healing empowered me to do things that I probably wouldn't have done because I let go of the bitterness, you know, the negativity from the activity or the act. And that made me a more rounded and more open to accept others who were different, you know, not only in skin color or class, but even if they had a disability, it could have been me, you know. So that's what resonated with me, the suffering that's still going on.
Darnisha, thank you for sharing that experience, especially the idea of being able to work through those feelings on the other end. It sounds like you need to do the next session when we do a session on internalized racism and racial healing. And there's things that can be done, but going through that process is so hard to unpack something that happens at such a young age among the people who are closest to us. I appreciate that you've been able to, hopefully people were able to learn from your experience as well.
Yeah, and I also wanted to thank you both because that's super important. I know Kavita touched on this, that we'll have a session on colorism, but the feeling of exclusion, or what I'll say is being exiled from your own culture, right? So for me, being light skinned, not feeling, when we talk about inclusion, not feeling Black enough, but then knowing I'm not white. So where do we fit in that? And then I love how you bring in that piece about forgiveness and the healing part, right? And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and where does that all stem from, right? And that's how we're disrupting the racism and transforming to an anti-racist organization, but then also, of course, implementing that within your own personal life. So that's just really deep. And I just wanted to thank you both for raising that.
Yeah. And the idea of empathy, right? I may not be able to walk in your shoes. You may not be able to walk in someone else's shoes, but there are other forms of oppression and experiences through which hopefully we can be more empathetic to others' experiences.
Hi, this is Rebecca from Partnership Health Plan. Our group experienced, it was interesting, every one of us felt isolated and different and like we didn't fit in during school years. We were mostly white in our group, but there's like you were saying at the beginning, who you are is so multifaceted. And so the smallest things like your accent or the food you chose to eat or the way you engaged in play, whether you engaged in what little girls should like to play or not. There's so many ways in which kids can be so harmful and so critical, and kind of nobody fit in. Nobody felt like, oh, I fit in, I'm comfortable. Despite by arguably looking like we should feel like we fit in. And it was just a really interesting comment. And I think some of the things people said to us in those very young formative years still carry. I mean, we still hear those voices of, you know, you're just, you don't fit, you don't fit. And that message is so, and like you were saying, Kavita, just the, you know, how do you be gracious and kind to people? And it's too late to go back to our childhood and help other people fit in better. But how do we teach children to be kind and care for each other and not exploit differences, but really welcome people?
Ongoing work
I
of
love that.
parenting and communities who parent together, and however we raise that our children. It's, I mean, the amount of, I have a middle schooler and a high schooler right now. So the last 5 years they were, I guess, elementary and middle school, and just the constant challenge for our schools and trying to work with parents and figure out how you create real communities of respect, and respecting those differences, especially when around our country, systemically, these things are being stripped away over and over again. I mean, we're going in some circles around issues of access and equity and what's recognized to be, I hate use, you know, normal, and these terms that get thrown around when, you know, we worked so hard to be more inclusive, and you know, recently we just taken so many steps back, that we're just going to have to work harder. Just have to keep at it. I know when I was telling some of my colleagues at the break that I run this nonprofit that works to get more diverse books into our young people's homes. And I think that's always like one of those good solutions, right? More and better books that show representation. Black faces, brown faces, Asian faces, Latino faces, stories that aren't centered in trauma, but are a little more mainstream as well. Darnisha and Darnisha, I'm going to ask Louise first, and then we'll end with you and go into our next section. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks so much. You know, I think that, you know, Kavita, you spoke to it so well, saying that, you know, we've all, you know, and really, Rebecca, you know, we've all experienced what it's like to feel different and to feel excluded. And I think, you know, that came up in our discussion as well, is that we might have been excluded in different ways, but that doesn't change the feeling of exclusion. And you know, Kavita, you spoke to it so well, just saying that, you know, a little empathy and compassion would take us all a long way with it. So that's my only input. I appreciated the sharing of everyone that chose to share in our group. It was an interesting discussion. You know, we had discussed childhood exclusions as well as fair housing exclusions that were problematic. And, you know, we all kind of spoke to the fact that it does seem like we're going backwards.
Thank you, Louise. That's why we enter that question, is to take it up a level, to share that there are so many ways that we exclude people, and through that lens, hopeful people can empathize more. Danisha, you want to take us home, close out this section?
Sure. Rebecca, I want to share some things with you, because I'm a grandma. I have 5. My oldest is 18. My son's 38. And when my 18-year-old started school, this was something that he brought home with him, because we very much have a melting pot family, right? And at that time he was 5, and I had moved here to San Diego from Las Vegas for work. He's still in Las Vegas. But every night on my way home from work, I would call him because we were really close. I was in the birthing room when he was born. So he had a hard time with me moving out here. And so he'd tell me about his day. And I told him, I said, well, tell grandma, you know, what you did at school today. Do you make any friends? And he goes, Grandma, there was this Mexican kid. And he kept talking. I was like, wait a minute. I said, what kind of kid? He goes, this Mexican kid. I said, doesn't he have a name?
He goes, yeah. I said, then you call him by his name. I said, you're not the black kid, you're Osiris. And so the world's going to do what it's going to do. Things are going to happen on campus, but having those consistent conversations with their children or their grandchildren, having them share what they're being exposed to. With my son and his two stepbrothers that I raised, I always tried to make sure I kept a type of relationship with them that they could come and talk to me about anything, even if they didn't agree with something that, you know, I told them they had to do. As long as it came with respect, we could have the conversation, right? So today, 28 years old, 38 years old, my son still talks to me about everything. And I've created that with my 18-year-old, right? So I think it's us just being very deliberate and having conversations with them, open-ended questions, things of that nature, because they're going to learn more from us than anybody else out there, right? And then when someone comes to them with something different, at least they have some tools to pull from, because we've indoctrinated that at home, right? And when they come home with those, you know, crazy conversations they've heard or someone brought to them, they will talk to us about it. And then we can get them straight and send them back out into the world and share the truth, their truth, our culture, our understanding, our beliefs. So I think that's how we combat that. And my son does it with the kids. So I just wanted to share that.
And we are so lucky that you did. Thank you, Danisha. I got nothing to add to that. That's like the most, you know, beautiful way of closing this out, right? It starts with us. We are the models. Got to drown out those other adults that aren't modeling properly and keep them focused on the good models that you are. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. And Danisha, I cannot believe you're a grandma. So, you know, not to comment too much on that, Grandma Hunter, but that's amazing too. We are going to step into our next section. Erin, could you pull up the slides again? Thank you. So Rashima centered us with talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We had a really great discussion now, and hopefully, which started in most of your breakouts around the various ways we get excluded from a very young age, whether it happens within the family or in our communities. And now we want to talk a little bit more about workplace. And what are those barriers to inclusion? So some of it is, you know, concepts that manifest, which we're going to get into, and then we'll have more conversation as well. So the first thing we want to talk about on the next slide is implicit bias. Now, I'm going to assume most of you this is not your first training session. I know this group has been offered a lot of different training sessions. So implicit bias probably isn't a new term for most folks, but it is something that we have to continue to unpack and understand, because it is one of the greatest barriers to inclusion, right? We implicit bias, you know, functionally as a definition, also referred to unconscious bias, right? And these attitudes, beliefs that are so baked in, they occur outside of our conscious awareness and control. That's the textbook definition, that it occurs outside of our control. It's so implicit in how we've been socialized and conditioned that it's just automatic. So example is that, you know, I mean, and this is in my adult life, when I'm doing an interview, and I used to be a program manager of an AmeriCorps program. We work long, hard hours, and I'm interviewing a woman, and she shares with me about her young children and something that's going on. Immediately, a bias is kind of, well, this is probably a little more conscious than unconscious, but there's, in my head, I'm thinking, is she going to be able to make it to work on time? Is she going to be able to get that breakfast? Like, I'm already playing out what might happen, making assumptions because of biases, right? She's a mother. She's like, we attach these things as if everybody lives their lives in a certain way, right? Again, that one, there's also kind of a bit of a debate going on about what's unconscious and what's conscious. I think we have to be really careful not to give ourselves a pass that some of our biases are unconscious, right? Because as soon as you learn about it, then it does become conscious, right? So that is kind of the lesson we want to take away from what implicit bias is, right? Once you learn about where you're, doing something around gender or making an assumption because you see, a young Latina woman, I make an assumption about where she may have been raised. That you make these attachments because we've been conditioned and socialized from a very young age by our families, by who's around us in our neighborhoods, what images we see, by every billboard and commercial and TV show, and who's at the center of that. What is good, what is bad, it all gets typed as soon as we come out of the belly. I didn't want to refer to the wrong body part. As soon as we come out of the belly, you are given pink clothing or blue clothing. It's very binary, all of our thinking, right? So that our gender stuff is deep and complicated, and we know that it isn't that simple anymore. Probably never was, but it certainly isn't today. And so now that we know better, we need to do better. On the next slide, just to give you a little more context around implicit bias and how baked in it is, our mind processes 11 million bits of information per moment. Only 40 bits of that 11 million are conscious. That's crazy, right? That means so much of what we do. Many of you probably drive a car, maybe less so these days, but when you did kind of get in your car every day and go to work, you get up, you get in the car, those things are happening so automatically. It's amazing that we are able to safely get to the other end of that drive. It's so automatic. Riding a bike, it's so automatic. You just do these things without thinking. It's somewhat unconscious. So we're most prone to bias under time pressure, right? Y'all work in very high pressured environments, the good work that you do. When you're going to interview someone and you needed someone like yesterday in that seat, right? You've got this housing coordinator position, nobody's in it. We're much more prone to bias in those circumstances. And the challenge is to kind of slow our roll, especially around hiring and recruitment. Otherwise, we're going to make decisions not based on who can actually do the job, who's actually going to contribute to diversity and inclusion, who's actually got the skills mapped to the job, and we may be making assumptions based on what we see in front of us. So our next slide is about stereotypes. So we're putting out these terms that are the things that stand in front of us at barriers to inclusion. So stereotypes, manifest from these biases that we learn at a young age, right? They're fixed, overgeneralized beliefs about a particular group or class of people. We know racism is deep. People make assumptions. You see a young Black man wearing a sweatshirt with his hood up, there's assumptions being made because of the way that we have socialized thinking around that in the media, right? You make an attachment like, I'm not safe. It's just whether you've even had an experience or not, those stereotypes are baked in, again, conditioned by a lot of the things around us. And in our next slide, this is a cartoon from Erin, can you go to the next slide? This is a cartoon from, I think it's Doonesbury. And this gives you a bit of a picture of basically two folks, they're about to cross each other's path and what's going on in their head. Now, of course, it's not going on in such a systematic way, but all of that is actually happening very quickly. We see each other and we start sizing each other up. So this person on the left is looking at the person coming towards them and they're saying, wow, this person is Black, male, they got a baseball cap on backwards. I'm going to associate something to that. they've got loafers on. Oh, okay, those are a little more, we stereotype loafers as being something safe, I guess. And then whistling Sondheim, oh, it's classical music, so you attach a different thing. All of that stuff is going on in that person's mind. They're sizing them up based on what they're seeing listed, which you have to, right? That's what you see, right? And then similarly, the young person on the right, young, old, I don't know, they're cartoons, is also looking at the person coming at them and saying, oh, white, male, wrong, in the wrong neighborhood. So different things, all of these things that we're processing when we're coming into contact with someone. So it's just one of these cartoons that gives you a little bit of insight into how quickly those things are happening in our minds, just as these folks are just crossing paths and sizing each other up. We need to be careful of that when we're talking about work. And then in our next slide, a very important concept that we want to share, which you likely have heard about, this concept of microaggressions. So we have bias, we hold these stereotypes, and they manifest often into something called microaggressions, which are these remarks, all different kinds of, some of them are short, some of them are long, some of them are direct insults, some of them are a little more indirect, but they're exchanges. They can be verbal, they can be nonverbal. A nonverbal example of a microaggression is if I could be in an elevator with my purse and the elevator doors open and a young man gets on who happens to be wearing a hoodie, and I hold my purse a little more closely to me. That is a nonverbal microaggression and a very common one. Verbal microaggressions, there's two examples on this slide. When someone might say to someone of another race or ethnicity in particular, you are so articulate. Now, it sounds like a compliment. And for those who come from communities where you're not traditionally looked at as articulate, it resonates perhaps in not the best way. What that person might be hearing is, wow, it's kind of unusual. I've never seen someone of your race or ethnicity have such, I'm sorry, this says strong math skills. That should say strong speaking skills. This is a very common one, this you are so articulate one, very common. And then this one, I got this a lot growing up, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Pennsylvania. And then, no, where are you really from? Where are you really from? Well, my parents were born in India. Now, for me, I never necessarily was taken so negatively until I woke up, 15 years later to understand sometimes it may not be, that the person was, it could be questioning. For other folks, everyone doesn't have this experience, but a lot of folks I know, some people in my own family do feel like they're being questioned. Why would you assume that I'm not from here? Because in that person's mind, you can only be from here, frankly, if you're white, is what's kind of being said there. You are not from here, you must be a foreigner. So these are examples. We're going to give you another lens into microaggressions. Our next thing is we're going to show you a very short, humorous take on microaggressions. And then we'll close with one slide before we have a discussion around this. And Aaron's going to share a video for us. This comes from MTV Decoded. They do this, Francesca Ramsey does this amazing series, and this is just one of many really kind of funny ways to enter conversations that can be difficult to have.
And let me know once I hit play if you cannot hear it.
Okay.
So you're not good at golf, but you're white. So microaggressions are those little unintentional insults that basically see people of color as stereotypes, which got me thinking, what if white people had to deal with racial microaggressions?
So like, where are you from?
No, like, where are you really from? Why do I have an accent? Like a Swedish accent.
You know, your English is really, really good. It's like I can't even tell you have an accent or anything.
I don't have an accent.
No, that's what I'm saying. You don't speak Gaelic?
You don't speak German?
Can you say a curse word in European? You know, like, what does that even mean?
Hey, Connor, you know about NASCAR stuff, right? Can you take a look at this?
Can you teach me how to line dance?
Play the banjo?
Act entitled in the supermarket. I love white food. No real flavor to it. Never an upset tummy.
You're so exotic.
How do you keep your hair like that? I love how it's so limp. Ew, why does it feel like that? Oh my God, so it just does that? No, you are really pretty for a white girl.
Your eyes are so round, like this.
You know who you look like? Kenny Chesney.
Zach Braff.
Emma Stone.
Rachel Maddow.
My friend Chad. Maybe you know him, because he's white too.
No, Emma Watson.
Not Macklemore. What's the other guy?
No, is it Emma Thompson?
It's CHAD, like Chad.
One of the Emmas. You look like an Emma.
You know who you look like? I bet you hear this all the time. Jeffrey Dahmer. How does it feel to be the token white guy in the office? Hey, Connor, can we get a white perspective on this? I love everything about white culture. You guys are like so fun. What do you mean you don't listen to Creed? You're white.
You've never tried meth. But you're white.
You don't act like a normal white person.
You're not really white, though.
You're not really white. I'm whiter than you are. So, did all your ancestors own slaves?
No, but of course he wishes that he could still own slaves. That's a part of his culture.
Bryce, back me up on this one. The thing you have to understand about white culture
No, I
is
went
that
to
white
an
people are...
historically white college, so
Okay,
I know
but
about
I
white culture.
backpacked
Okay,
in
listen.
Europe. So can you say how ridiculous this was? I know. Story of my life. If you've ever experienced microaggressions because of your race, gender, sexuality, or body type, go ahead and vent about it in the comments.
Can you teach me how to like take a really popular rap song and like make it a ukulele song? It's so cool. I think it's so cool how you guys do that.
Thank you, Erin. And when you get a chance, if you could pop those slides back up, thank you. So as you can see, this was a humorous take on microaggressions from the lens of if white folks experienced it. We want to make it clear that microaggressions can be delivered by all different kinds of groups. It's not just white folks who make microaggressions. We all do, and many people do in different ways. But of course, it gives us a very stark contrast by showing these kinds of statements that some, again, I don't think things are as black as white as being intentional or not intentional, conscious, unconscious. I think we have to be very careful. Those lines are more and more blurred. You may not be intentional and yet you said something. It's all about learning, right? Learning, maybe I should think about that comment before I say it next time. It doesn't mean you don't want to get to know somebody. It's just more about time and context and space. But we did want to end this section by reinforcing the fact that microaggressions are, while they're called micro, there's nothing micro about them. People who experience them, it can feel like thousands of pinpricks all day long. And microaggressions have now been linked to stress. You know, we have really different health outcomes for different groups of people, and it's not because of their education level. It's not necessarily tied to economics. Research is unpacking that, particularly for people of color and for Black folks and Black women in particular, the levels of stress are such that they are having a huge health impact. And there's nothing else to point to. College educated, it's not about education. So this is a quote from Ibram Kendi to kind of sum it up, that microaggressions are a persistent daily hum of racist abuse. It's not minor. I use the term abuse because aggression is just not as exacting a term. Abuse accurately describes the action and its effect on people. Distress, anger, depression, fatigue, suicide, what other people call racial microaggressions, I call racist abuse. So now that we kind of took you up and down and up and down, there's a lot of information, as well as like trying to make, keep it a little light. And then the fact is these are challenging concepts. maybe not to understand, but certainly to experience. And so we just want to show you lots of different lenses to enter the conversation. This says small groups, but we're not doing small groups. We're going to keep it in the big group just for the interest of time. And just open up the conversation. Y'all did such a great job sharing before. Hopefully we can continue the conversation, which is, where do you think bias, conscious or unconscious, impacts you at work in your role?
For me, we hired a third-party company to do a race and bias study on Black homeless individuals in the county of San Diego. And they did the study, and it was pretty telling. And it was interesting to me when the two women that were presenting their findings would ask the question, why do you think that is? And my counterparts in the room said nothing. And at that time, I might have been on the job for a week. And she changed the slide. And I was just kind of appalled that nobody said anything. And I asked her, could you take the slide back? And I looked at it as an opportunity to educate my coworkers on the history of racism in San Diego and how that is systemic and is built into the fiber and structure of the institution that's supposed to offer these services to the community. And conscious or unconscious, when they're training the person to do the job, that's supposed to be the person you go to for help and services, they're trained with that bias, not to let those people in. And it was interesting to me how no one would say anything though, you know? So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Donisha, for sharing that. I also want to touch on something that you said. I think even from the earlier points that we brought up, incorporating that empathy and equity piece, we try to change and influence the language that we use. So using a person first center language, which is when we're talking about individuals experiencing homelessness, saying that instead of assessing them by their situation and calling them like homeless people or homeless person, because that further breaks up that bias being able to wiggle its way in there. And you're looking at, not you specifically, but people looking at individuals experiencing homelessness or any situation that they're in and being able to really sticker that bias on there on top of the race that they may present themselves as, right? So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, because that was super, super important, that it is a trained thing. Samantha?
Thank you. Yeah, something that comes to mind for me on this topic is how I'm involved in DEI work within a local philanthropic organization. And this organization, at its founding, was by nature of it being a philanthropic organization, historically founded by wealthy white women. And in recent years, they've been trying to be intentional about increasing the diversity. And so I happen to co-chair the DEI team. And I find it interesting that while there are other women of color and various ethnicities within our team, and this is not the only place that I've had this experience, is I feel like people feel more comfortable saying things to me or engaging with me because they see me as somehow a safer or less threatening Black person or person of color for them to engage with around sensitive or potentially uncomfortable topics. Whereas if they were engaging with another person of color within the team who just has a different style, way of being, they would want to avoid engaging that person because that person's style doesn't make them feel safe and comfortable. So I think there's a bias present in that when people do that. And I don't know that when people are doing that, that they're aware that that's an indicator of their own bias.
Yeah, I love that you just bring up that because it's if you're a person of color, and specifically I've had this happen to me as well, as a Black individual, if you seem more assimilated to the white culture characteristics, then you're less of a threat, or you're less dangerous, or you're more approachable, right? And so, like you said, in the group, people tend to sway more towards you. And so in instances like that, I think somehow in a way that feels, I'm losing the word, but to point it out, right? And to offer, hey, why don't we ask our other colleague, or why don't we ask this person, get your opinion, and spread it open and open that door. Because if they're not going to do it, we have to be the people to do that, you know? But that is absolutely a biased example. So thank you for sharing that with us. Jillian, I saw your hand. Did you not want to say your comment anymore?
I just wanted to take it down. So I've been participating in multiple forms of racial equity and inclusion training. And so it's having us take a look at, because I'm from the city of Fresno, it wants us to take a look at all of our programs and even internally, our internal practices with hiring and promoting and things like that. And so when we do this, like Samantha's example, when we look at the boards of some of our programs that we're funding, the majority of them are white. And how do we make those changes to assure that there's no bias in the decisions that they make and the policies that they pass and how they are assisting individuals? And so we look at our HMIS data to see, you know, who, and that's part of our funding, right? Part of our funding requirements is to look at our HMIS data to see if there's any gaps or if there's any inequities that we're discovering in services received, provided, and our outcomes. And then the example, I think, I'm not sure who mentioned about when people are placed into permanent housing, like how do we assure that they stay there? And how do we assure that they're continuing to receive services to help keep them in those homes, and the education to help keep them in those homes? And so I do, from my perspective, and perspective or perception is reality in most cases, right? So when I look at the programs that are serving our most vulnerable, those experiencing homelessness, we try to, you know, provide them links to trainings like this, invite them to attend these trainings to help maybe spark an idea for them that, oh, maybe we need to change this practice, or maybe we need to change that. And then the other, from what I see, is I'm kind of like the bottom of the totem pole here. And I would see these trainings as being more valuable to leadership, right? Giving them an opportunity to actually make changes, and, you know, making sure that I can promote this information upward, and hopefully that it's taken seriously.
Jillian, thank you so much. Our next section is going to talk about working against and all the things internally. So I want to come back to your voice, because it sounds like your organization and you are already doing a lot of things that we can likely learn from. So thank you for sharing. And again, hopefully there's a part 2 in our last section. Louise, you want to close us out? I think we have to take a break. You're on mute.
Sorry, you took the hand down, forgot to mute. I said, hi, Jillian. I'm part of COC leadership in Placer County, so as well as working for my agency. So I agree we are sensitive to that placement, and I think that we find these differences everywhere. And to me, partly it's not just what the data says, that this is the data, but what does it tell us? And so I keep on working with my staff about, well, why is this way? Not just, to Darnisha, that nobody said, why is it? And nobody answered. So one of the things that I've raised a perennial issue about is we perform SART exams when you do accompaniments for someone who's been raped for a rape kit exam. Black people are very well represented in other areas of the agency. There are very few SARTs ordered, and these mostly get ordered by police unless they're a VAWA for people who identify as Black. And I've raised the question, is this something internal? Because I don't want to out and out say, well, you know what, that means the PDs are racist, but it's something that I feel should be raised with them, because it's like, why should I not see a corresponding low level of people of color? Like, obviously our outreach is there, because on the side of people that do not get that particular service, the representation is good. So to me, it's always like, what is the story behind the data? Because there could be two things going on. There could be institutional bias, or there could also be less likelihood on the part of people of color to trust the police and report in the first place and access a service that they could have. So it's not, it's a deep, whenever we start getting into these things, it turns into a deeper dive than we think it will be. Because there's usually not just one reason why something is the way it is.
Yeah.
So that was my comment.
And an excellent comment at that. We have to break, and I just so appreciate all of you for all of your comments. And then particularly these last few, when we're talking about the things that you're seeing in the workplace, whether it's internally in hiring and recruitment and that kind of thing, and your board representation, in what's going on with program outcomes and where questions are being asked that are misplaced and all of that. This is really where the transformation happens, right? All Darnisha and Samantha actually sharing, speaking up when you see things that feel wrong, it's usually because it is wrong. It isn't being done in a way that's equitable. And so keep at that emotion. And we're going to talk more about good practices towards working against all of this. We have to take a couple-minute break. LaQuansha, do you want to guide us there?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Kavita, and thank you all for being so engaging. We're going to take a 5-minute break right now. So if you could all return by 1:35, that would be great. So we'll see you back in about 5 minutes. All right. Thank you all for joining us back for part 2. Kavita, you want to take it away?
Thank you. Erin, can you put the slides back up? So our next section, I'm gonna tell you right now, it's too short. It's just too short. This is, and thankfully we have actually in the future, and I don't have the dates in front of me, but 2 different sessions on the ways we can work against bias. One that's really focused on programs and outcomes and the good work that you do in our world, and one that's really focused on recruitment and hiring, because they're very different, and they need their own sessions. So those exist. So we're just doing a very small dive, focusing mostly around the recruitment and hiring, but with some discussion around just workplace and kind of confronting bias. So the first slide is really about recruitment and hiring, just touching upon each of these. And what I can tell you is when Kristen and LaQuansha and team send out their post email, we will send you a few resources. There's some really more current thinking around inclusive recruitment and hiring. So we're looking forward to sharing a couple of great websites I just found with just kind of new hot off the press materials, whether it's your performance evaluation or your interview practices, just some really good, and it's open source too. So we can just grab it and, make it our own. So on the first slide, the next slide, Erin, is inclusive recruitment and hiring. Again, this is just a few of the many different practices. This is where a lot of organizations need to both get started and then just keep at it. Even those who may have some diversity, perhaps among the ranks, as soon as you start getting up into management and leadership, it tends to just get whiter. It's just fact. It's just the way that most organizations work. And so we need to do many things to work against that. So visible commitment to DEI. Some of you shared some work. Jillian, yours in particular, your organization is doing the work. Hopefully there is some visible commitment to DEI, not just in practice, but in words, right? In a commitment to DEI statement that has been developed, and now it goes on every job description, so that anybody looking at there like, oh wow, check this out. They're at least they're trying, right? I may look at their website and their leadership may look like they're not diverse, but at least they're trying, and that means something, right? And then you weave that commitment. That language needs to be everywhere, on your website, on your job descriptions, in your employee manual. Words matter. We know that that's not enough, but it is a big, big, big step. Building relationships with a more diverse set of people in organizations. I know when I was growing up, I read somewhere that what color is your parachute? There's been like 25 versions since it was first put out. And that was this book you read to talk about how you get jobs. And the number one thing, at least, 20 years ago when I read it, was your networks. That's where you got your jobs. And it probably continues to be the number one place where people make referrals. The last 2 jobs I had before I started this consulting practice were definitely because someone networked me in, right? Our networks tend to be homogenous. They just are. That's just how it is. It's true. It's a fact. If you have a diverse network, good for you. Unfortunately, most of us don't. So we have to build relationships. We have to tap into different networks. That's just kind of the biggest challenge, is both just kind of getting access to more diversity and then actually building relationships, right? You can't just post a website on, blackaccountants.com. Like, that's not enough, but at least you need to get into that organization. You need to make a relationship with people. A lot of this is about relationships, right? It's not enough to just post to a handful of websites and be done. So building those relationships. Training on understanding bias. We talked about that. You got a little training today. You probably came in with some. You have to continue to do that with anybody involved in the recruitment and hiring process. Anybody interviewing people, they need to learn what bias is. They need to have examples of where it shows up, because the more we know, the more we can do better. Blind resume reviews. I'm be honest that I haven't worked with an organization that is doing this yet, but it is something that is really important because a lot of our biases start with just looking at that. I know someone in the chat shared previously thinking they looked at someone's name and they thought it was a particular gender, and then the person showed up on the phone and it was male. So similarly, there have been big studies done, hundreds of them on taking the same resume and putting a male sounding name and a female sounding name, sending them out, and inevitably the male sounding name gets 2, 3, 4 times more callbacks. Name alone, same resume. Same thing has been done with, let's say, a more ethnic sounding name and a more, white sounding name. That's been done, right? Jamal versus Mark. Same resume sent out. Jamal's not getting as many callbacks as Mark is. It's a fact. It's been research studied. So blind resume reviews is all those resumes come in. There's tech tools out there now that I think can do this for you. And I will try to find some more specific information on that. But essentially, you take the name off, you take the degree, you take the name off, you take the school the person attended off. A lot of bias creeps in by looking at what school that person attended. It's just important, perhaps, that they have a bachelor's degree, right? And then some people are often taking the address off too, because particularly if you're hiring regionally, you can make an assumption. Oh, wow, she lives in Harlem. What does that mean? Things like that. Those are the biases. So these are the ways that we try to remove bias from the process where we can. Panel interviews and questions mapped to skills. I don't remember doing many panel interviews when I was growing up in my workplaces. I remember I needed someone like yesterday. I was doing all the interviewing. I was doing all the hiring. There were no panels. It's really important to try to have at least 2 people. A panel can be 2. And so you have diverse thoughts, as diverse as you can be, and whether it's gender, ethnicity, role, and so different people can use their own lens to be interviewing someone. Now, you want the questions mapped to the skills too, and you want everyone asking the same questions. Got to kind of, I'm someone who likes to talk, obviously, but talk to people also. So when I get in an interview, I often go really personal quick, and I've had to fight against that in my latter years because you're not really trying to get to know them yet. Right now, you need to know, can this person do this job? What experiences do they have? So it's really important to take the job itself, really be clear on what those skills are, and map questions that will get you there. Otherwise, all of a sudden you can find out, you went to Drexel, I went to Drexel, and all of a sudden they got 3 more points that they don't deserve because of a familiarity, and that's not a reason why you give people points. Clear rubrics, that's what that one was. Okay, lower barriers, not standards. Rashima's going to take us on this slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Kavita. Yeah, so what we want to do here is we want to lower the barriers, not the standards. And I think when people think about job descriptions, we put all these elements in place to weed out certain things, but what we're doing is we're really placing up barriers, right? We want to be able to eliminate those barriers so that people are still accessible to be able to apply for jobs and have a chance, but not lower the standard. So for one, we can potentially have items such as need to have versus nice to have. In certain instances, especially within the homeless response system, we don't need to have 7 or 5 years of a specific skill, right? But it would be nice to have something if you had experience within a certain area. An interesting thing is a person with lived experience versus a person who has a master's degree, a PhD. Their skill set actually doesn't equate to each other, right? But that person has never had a secondary degree, but they have so much to offer. So instead of saying need to have, which will weed out that person from being able to qualify for this job that they are probably super fit for, it'll weed them out. But what we're doing when we say nice to have, it'll be able to allow them to apply with confidence, to actually see them as a candidate who we actually will be hiring, and lower that barrier so that they are within that pool of candidates. Another thing is the language, right? So the language that we use around that. We want to make sure that applications are language accessible. So we don't want to use words that are huge words, because we're not trying to see who's, intelligent, whatever that word means. We want to make sure that the person can actually get the job done. So when we list out things on the application, we're going to say, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and we want to make sure that we're doing plain language, universal language, so that everyone can understand, and we're not intimidating others that will probably be perfect for that job. And then we have, like I just said, lived experience versus learned experience. Individuals who have actually experienced homelessness, who have lived in poverty. Those are qualifications that you cannot, you can't pay for, right? Versus the learned experience. And so with that element, we want to make sure that we're making an accessible application so that people are still being able to come in and apply, and there's no intimidation associated with that. And we're not upping or not lowering the standards, but lowering the barrier. And for outreach methods, we want to make sure that we're looking everywhere, right? We're not just going to put applications on specific websites, or we're not going to do word of mouth, because word of mouth eliminates the accessibility for all people to be able to apply for that job. Because if you're not in connection with a certain group of people or that certain organization, if you don't know anyone there, but you're like, hey, I think I have a really great chance of working here, that'll make you not accessible to be able to even know that the application is up. And we all know, especially within America, it's all about connections. Some people don't have those connections. So we want to make sure that our outreach methods are everywhere, and that we're looking high and low to find really, really amazing candidates. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kavita.
Thanks, Rashima. So on this next slide, we've talked about a number of the things that are on here. We really want to focus on the very last thing. So we've talked a lot about building awareness, being open to what you don't know. So many examples have been shared, working against the affinity bias, making decisions based on facts, not your reaction to something that doesn't have anything to do with the job. And then this project implicit I'm looking at something. This project implicit is a site where you can go to, it helps you kind of surface and see where you may have biases. So something that's not on this slide that we want to talk about is the things you need to do in the workplace when things occur. Calling in and calling out is how we call it. And essentially, I think Darnisha and Samantha had shared some examples with us, and I just chatted a link. We have to learn to speak up. We find in all, we've been doing this work for a long time now, and particularly in these last 2 years, as so many organizations grapple with becoming more anti-racist. And the thing that seems to really hold people back is being able to speak up. And the only way we can learn to speak up is by practicing. So, there's a bit of the document we chatted, and it'll come in a post email as well. It gives you kind of sample language for when you hear something that is off or wrong or whatever microaggression it might be. You're in a workplace. Ideally, you find words to call someone in so that they can reflect with you, around you, whatever's happened. We're trying to find language to call folks in rather than call them out. Now, some things may happen that are so egregious, you're going to need to call someone out. But of course, that's just got to be really something, because you're in a workplace that's so egregious. All you can do is call them out and say, this is unacceptable, right? That's calling someone out. This is unacceptable. You can't do that here. That's calling out language. Calling in is if someone says something and you say, huh, Kristen, what did you mean? What do you mean by that? I'm not quite sure I understand what you're saying. So you've put the ball back into that person's court to one, make sure that you heard, did they just, say what I thought they said about, that felt like a microaggression or felt like something, and it gives them a moment to pause as well and maybe reshape their thinking. Now that's a ridiculously short summary of what's in that calling in and out document. But the point is, there are lots of examples. We have your colleagues among you, people are modeling around you. Everybody can learn to speak up and call people in. It takes practice, and we hope that you all get started if you haven't already been doing it. And then our last slide before we just go back to the big group discussion is a reflection by one of our favorites. The last slide. Rashima, do you want to read out that last slide?
Yeah, would love to. So the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism. You don't have to be free of anti-racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. I love that. I love that.
All right, you can just close the slides. So we were going to just have another, with whatever minutes we have left, 7, 6, I can't do the math, but just open it up. If you have any questions about any of the content, we'd love to hear from you. If you have good examples of the work that you're doing that you think would be useful to share with folks on the call, we'd love to hear from you too. Just really open it up for you all in these final minutes.
And I just want to say one thing before we open super quickly is understanding the difference between language and dialogue, and knowing that language are the words that you use, and dialogue is the way that you use them, the tone, the pressure that comes behind it. And so when you're doing a call-in, toss that ball back in their court, but also let them know, when we say awareness, letting them know whatever race you identify as, how that came off. So that way they're not just re-questioning, because they may be unconscious. They may have did that their whole life and they're not understanding the why. And so adding in that why piece, and then using, making sure the language and the dialogue is in a great place so that it doesn't cause what may seem like a call out, as the examples that Kavita used.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that, Shima.
You were talking about just different hiring practices and stuff. This was something that I heard about recently that wished that I had experienced this before. And I think it's inclusive of people's different communication and learning styles, is when it comes to interviewing, and especially in the virtual world where a lot of interviews are now done either on Zoom or in Teams, but putting the interview questions in the chat box so that people can read them and look at them. Well, I think, a lot of times you just get really flustered when you don't remember the question, and there's just ways that I think you can support people during the interview process to bring out the best in them, because interviews can be very nerve-wracking and you can lose your train of thought. And either, if it's not even virtual, but they get to your office 15 minutes early and they're sitting in the lobby, hand them the questions that you intend to ask them so they get a chance to look over it and kind of prepare, the best version of themselves for that interview. I wish I had had that for every interview I'd ever done. So I hope other people can adopt that practice.
It's such a good example. It's such a good example. It's like, what? Unless you're like, doing something like secret data stuff or whatever secret-y jobs that exist out there, why not? Why can't? That's such a good reflection. I actually hadn't heard that one, but why not provide them ahead of time? Why not give people an opportunity to bring their best self? Because you're gonna, yeah, exactly. I think to that point, Erin, this happens in schools so much, we often think from a deficit of how's someone going to game the system. Often when solutions are being created, someone's at the table to say, no, you can't do that because they might take someone else's answers. Like, really? Is that the norm? Is that really what's the average person is gonna take someone else's answers and pretend to be someone else? I don't think so. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of times things are designed and that we need to revisit them. That's a great example. What else? Questions, examples?
What thoughts or feelings about anything that we talked about today? What's popping up in your head about this? What do you feel you're walking away with?
So I'm taking a look at this document that you guys shared, the calling out versus calling in. And I think it's going to be really useful, especially in public meeting settings, because it's really not appropriate to call someone out in that kind of a setting. I've got, all kinds of people watching me, and, it really pulls away from the topic at hand. And so these calling in prompts, I'm going to really look at these and really see how I can integrate them into my normal vocabulary.
That's so great to hear, because they are, I don't, some of them I don't love. I'm very honest. Like it's one of these things that when we have some time, I'd like to adapt a version, right? You have to do that with every tool we provide, right? Everything we find, you have to make it your own. So I love that you're already thinking about how to make it your own language, Veronica. Thank you.
I think this call just reminds me of all the work to be done, because I feel like there's so much desire from my point of view, and a desire for the people around us. And I'm really working hard. I need to do so much more work on separating what we consider well, this is professional and this is what we do. And I really struggle with, is this professional in what we do? Or is this biased? Is this privileged? Is this white upper class? How do we determine this is professional? This is a best practice and standard, which I'm trying to apply across the board to be consistent, right? Yes, and thank you for your feedback about what you're saying, where you're hiring. And so being professional, I don't mean how people react, but what our expectations are. And so when we use certain guidelines, I feel like we need to look at them all, whether it's the interview questions, whether it's our standards, whether it's our protocols, to try to figure out how we can suss that out so I can make suggestions for change that will still, be useful, because there's some usefulness in some of the practices we have, and then there's some that are antiquated. So it's just a big task to kind of pull that apart. Not impossible, but it's definitely something I'd like to do. Anyway, I'm not sure what I've offered there. Just that's what I've been holding and struggling with for a while. And we've really tried to work on, replacing education with experience. Because again, if we're looking for lived experience, or we're looking for someone who didn't have the opportunity to go to school, we know if you come out with a degree that doesn't demonstrate that you have a particular ability to be empathetic and work with clients, right? But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, around how do we change that institutionally so that we are, because what I'm struggling with now is just being consistent, right? That whole equity versus equality, what does that look like? Anyway, I have more questions than I have answers, but that's kind of what I've been holding and working with, and I will continue to work on. And clearly I need partners to do that.
Serene, look at all these partners around you on this call. You have so the fact that we still have people on camera is a good indicator. We have to close, and I hate that because we're just getting warmed up with so many good examples. But Serene, I think you represent the greatest outtake is, yes, it's a lot of work, especially the recruitment and hiring stuff, forms and documents. And every day you take a step. Every day you take a step, and each step you take, whether it's the first time you call someone in or the first document, each time, it can't get all done. You can't wait till August when it's summertime and there's less work. That never happens, right?
No.
Each day you take a step and we'll all be better on the other end.
Yeah.
We have to end on time, right? Looking at our colleagues here, yes. We have had a great time being with you. We learned a lot from you, as we always do on any of our trainings. And next week, there's another session. I think Kristen or someone chatted the calendar. So hopefully we'll get to see a lot of you again. There's sessions going on all summer. And thank you again for your time. And thank you especially for the good work that you do in our world.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest
For
of
your
the day,
feedback.
everybody. Bye.
Thank you.